Hello, my name is David Whitehead and this is my third video for the subject of intercultural pragmatics. In today's presentation, I'll discuss the cultural accommodation I've done for the website of my university, the University of Alicante. Here's the structure for today's presentation. The first thing I'll do is show you the original texts, the welcome message as well as the strategic plan. Then I'll discuss a very particular method I've used to carry out this exercise. Following that, I'll remind everyone about the value dimensions which have already been discussed in previous exercises, but since the whole point of a cultural accommodation is to use these dimensions, I'll give you a refresher. And after that, I'll show you my final version of both texts, while also discussing some of the changes I made. And finally, in the conclusion section, I'll give you my opinion on some of the things that could be improved, some of the tips I would give to people trying to write messages to post in websites in the future. Let's begin. Here you have the original text for the welcome message. Now, the way in which I've carried out this exercise, as I was mentioned earlier, is after reading the original texts for the first time, I found them very strange because I tried to read the English version only, and it was obvious to me that these translations had been done by a machine and not a human. So since it was so difficult to interpret the meaning, what I did was to try and reconstruct the text using my own words. And for my own version, then I carried out the cultural accommodation. So I'll briefly take you through some of the changes I made. In the Spanish version, it uses the word desarrollar, referring to actividades. Now, when translated into English, that came out as activities that can be developed. This is quite strange, since in English we generally carry out activities, we don't really develop activities. In the Spanish version, it uses the word valiosos to refer to professionals, so profesionales valiosos. However, in English that comes out as turn into valuable professionals, and this is very strange. At least when I read it, I was very surprised, because the word value usually refers to money or economy, so to talk about professionals in terms of their value sounds a bit strange. Then going into expressions, the first one to note is agradecer vuestro interés, which obviously in Spanish sounds fine. However, when translated into English, it came out as feel grateful for your interest. And in English, we generally use the verb to be. You are grateful, you don't feel grateful. And finally, it's something I found strange even in the Spanish version, was it says os repito nuestra bienvenida. But even though that's already strange in Spanish, when it translated into English using the word reiterate, it simply sounds terribly wrong. Now here's the original version of the second text, which is the strategic planning the university has developed to improve itself looking at the future. I'll briefly take you through some of the same type of changes I made in terms of the language. It uses the expression compartimos el orgullo, which is already a little bit strange in Spanish, but in English to share the pride sounds very strange. Pride is something we usually have, we don't really share it with others. In terms of desafíos que realizar, it came out as challenges to do, and in English we generally face challenges or we accept challenges, but we don't really do challenges. And finally, this expression, el mejor instrumento para tomar decisiones, is used to refer to the actual strategic planning itself. When turned into English, it came out as the best tool to make the most appropriate decisions. and it's very strange to refer to a plan as a tool. So it's something metaphorical or abstract combined with tool, which is something physical. Now, let's go through the essential value dimensions which have already been discussed in previous exercises. The ones in bold are the ones that I have put most attention on, since I feel that they are the ones in which Spaniards have an excess. So they are the ones that have to be mostly accommodated into other cultures. The dimension of time refers to the way in which we express or communicate ourselves. So the Spanish culture is considered polychromic in the sense that we talk about many different things at the same time, whereas a monochronic culture, would focus on one thing at a time. The dimension of personal space refers to the way in which we relate to others around us. So, Spanish culture is considered a contact culture. So if you read the original text, you'll find expressions such as nuestra cálida bienvenida, which shows a lot of friendliness between the writer and the receptor. Whereas in non-contact cultures, we would tend to find more distance between the speaker and the receiver, and more respect shown. In terms of context, this essentially refers to the way in which we express content. So our culture, the Spanish culture, would be considered high context in the sense that we express a lot of content in an implicit manner, and the reader has to figure out what the other person is trying to say. And this can be very confusing for people who are low context, who expect to find everything explicitly mentioned. The dimension of individualism refers to, once again, the way in which we refer to ourselves in society. Spanish culture is considered collectivist in the sense that we often refer to ourselves as a group. And if you read the original text, you'll see how the writer uses the pronoun we or our, or refers to the university as a whole or the institution. Whereas in other cultures, such as the American, we would expect something more individualistic, referring to the writer as himself, I, my university, etc. Power distance is probably the least relevant in this exercise, but it essentially refers to, once again, the distance between speaker and receptor and receiver, and the type of respect that is shown between both of them. Masculinity refers to the way in which we express ourselves, and the Spanish cultures would be considered a feminine culture in the sense that we tend to use lots of poetic expressions and we make high use of metaphors. Whereas other cultures, which would be considered masculine, tend to go straight to the point and use very clear language. And finally, another very relevant dimension in this exercise is uncertainty avoidance. And essentially it's equivalent to context in Hall's. So once again it refers to implicitness and explicitness. Now, here is my final version of the first text, the welcome message. The problem I found, and I imagine most of the people in our class found, is that we do not have a particular target audience. Because of this, we can't really know what cultural values we need to accommodate to. So the way in which I approached this problem was to find out which of the value dimensions were the ones that Spaniards have an excess in, which were the ones in bold in the previous slide. And what I've done is to not eliminate them completely, but to try to make it standard so that anyone in the world would find the text standard. I'll go through, so, and the value dimensions on the left are the ones which are very reminiscent in the Spanish version, and the ones that I have tried to move onto a more standard version. The first one would be time, and I've tried to change it from being very multi-focus into a more single focus approach, which is also generally, if we were a newcomer to the university, we would like to see the information straight to the point. So, whereas in the first version of the text, it listed everything the page contained, I actually selected the 3 elements which I found most relevant, which are the description of the campus, a list with the members of the staff, and the different activities that university offers, rather than naming, I think it was 9 things that it mentions in the original version. In terms of context, I tried to make it more low context, coming from a high context approach. So to do this, I simply lowered the number of words approximately by 220 and used expressions that go straight to the point, once again to make it clearer for the reader. Then to change the approach from being collectivist into more individualistic, I switched some of the pronouns from we to I, or from our to my, or I simply used a generic referent, such as the university. And in terms of uncertainty avoidance, which is directly related to context, once again I simply tried to make everything explicit, clear and simple. Now here's the second text, which is the strategic planning, and essentially I went through the same dimensions, although in this one there wasn't the same problem between polychronic and monochronic, because there wasn't it didn't talk about many things at the same time, so that wasn't a problem. However, the other 3 dimensions were a problem. Once again, in terms of context, I carried out the same ideology of lowering the amount of words. In terms of individualism, once again, I tried to change most of the pronouns, such as we and our, into I. And in terms of uncertainty avoidance, once again, I tried to make everything as clear as possible and make everything explicit in the text. So, to finish, some of the suggestions I would give for people in the future is, if you're going to publish something in English and you're obviously intending it to be read by lots of people, you really have to make sure that the text is written appropriately. And referring once again to the main problem most of us probably found in this exercise, is that it is very difficult to accommodate the text to a global audience, because you don't know what things you should change and which ones you should leave. So I thought the most logical approach would be to make it standard for everyone. Okay, so here are the references I used, and obviously you have the page of the university if you're interested in reading the text. And thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that these concepts are clearer for you now.